Hello, good morning to the last day of the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. It's been a very intense week, and I hope that everyone is enjoying as much as I'm doing it. I'm having the privilege to moderate some of the sessions, and I'm very much looking forward to this one because actually we are going to cover a specific topic that has been showing up in different sessions all across the festival. And the main thing is how can public sector can attract bright people to address the challenges of the nowadays world, especially in this moment of corona crisis. How can we ensure that the people within public sector is using their creative potential? How can we make public sector cool? How can we keep the good people on board? And to analyze that, we are going to start with broad research that some researchers and professors from the University of Valencia have been covering about the different systems that public sector is using in different European countries to hire people. And then we'll dig deeper in a specific case that we know about it already a bit, which is the case of public practice in UK, a really interesting non-profit organization that is placing urban planning professionals that come from the private sector within public sector organizations. I'm not going to detail their full CV of the participants. You have all the information on the website, but I think it's more interesting to listen to what they have to present. And we will start with Andrés Boix. Andrés is full professor at the University of Valencia, and he will start sharing which are those diverse hiring mechanisms in different governments across Europe. Andrés, welcome. The floor is yours.
So thanks, Ramon, and many thanks also to the organization of this Creative Bureaucracy Festival, which is really a wonderful idea. I've been following some of the sessions, and it was really nice, and also kind of disturbing because you realize how much things you don't know. So it's really interesting. So hello and good morning to everyone from sunny but today a bit windy Valencia. What I am going to explain to you is the part of a little research that we have conducted, Alba Soriano and myself. And I am going to present to you the first part, kind of introduction to our research. I'm going to start the sharing of the screen. No? So the idea in my case is to try to make a comparative assessment of the different public employees selection processes across Europe after the research we have made, and to try to identify how these venerable traditions we had, little by little, they have changed a little into more creative ways to do it. And why that may be interesting to do in countries like Spain, for instance, where that has not been the case. Very quick ideas. At the beginning, 200 years ago, when the modern state was born, the system we had to appoint people was the spoil system, as you know. But the spoil system had many downsides. The political dependence, maybe that's something with a good consequence, for instance, in order to democracy, but well, on the overall, it was not a very positive thing. Moreover, the skills of the people were clearly low. It was possible to upgrade the skills of those people because they were not selected because of the skills or of their knowledge. They were selected only because of political affinity. The lack of continuity of administrative bureaucracies of the staff was a problem because you have to learn each 4 years, each 5 years, each 6 years, each 8 years, because you had new people, and that was a problem. And the idea of fairness today is very different than it was in the past. We consider it's not fair to appoint just people because of the trust of the politicians in charge, or because they are part of a political organization. But the most important thing is the overall efficiency of the system. It was really low. So we changed and we replaced the spoil system with this merit system we have, which has a very structured and heavy public employee selection procedures, and which try to create a fair system to appoint the proper people and to have proven knowledge in the staff that you have chosen. But this system, it has worked well as a whole, and clearly is a better system than the spoil system, but it has some social costs. The first one and most clear one is its rigidity. It's very rigid. It has problems in order to react to new necessities. And that's a different thing from, for instance, market selection processes, because they are clear, more flexible. The second problem is that it's not clear whether it's a success when selecting the most suitable candidates in every case, because we have some doubts that maybe we stress the problem of knowledge and we are neglecting the issue of skills, and maybe we have to change a bit the selection process in order to guarantee not only fairness, but also that we have the best people. And the third and maybe more important social cost is that opportunity costs of the system are really heavy, and also impacts on inequality. We have a lot of people preparing the process for maybe years in order to try to have success in this highly heavy structured selection process. And that creates problems for minorities and for people with low incomes, and also some gender problems, because not everyone has the same time, the same amount of time to prepare that. So this system, this heavy system with everyone being treated in exactly the same way, has advantages, but also those social costs. We tend to test knowledge, but maybe it's better not only to test knowledge, but also to test skills. No? And that's why in the private sector, we have this aptitude testing that is more and more common. And we maybe it's interesting to try to get some ideas from that. The private sector also tends to try to discover who really the person is. And that's something that this system in public sector, very, very heavy, very, very uniformous, is not able to do. And we have some alternatives in some countries. For instance, the alternative in Germany with the stats examen that tries to evaluate all the process during the university years. And after that, they have a very quick exam after university. And with those grades, they make a rank. And after that, people is choosing some public offices, and after some practice, you can stay there. So that's a system that reduces a lot those social costs. There are other possibilities. For instance, the French tradition, this is the building, the nice building in Strasbourg of the ENA, École Nationale de l'Administration in France. They try to select to do like a scout of the bright people across the country, and they select them and they give them money, they pay them for a study in order to prepare to be the best public employees. But the problem with this is social inequality, because even though you try to scout, there's always going to be social inequalities, because this idea that I am going to discover who is the best, notwithstanding which family he came from, etc., or she came from, is the typical tradition in every European country that is more honor in the breach than in the observance. So this system has some problems. And that's also an example of France. The France football team that won the World Championship in 1998, and it was acknowledged by everyone that they won because they have a very diverse team, and they could extract talent from everyone. So that's maybe easier to do in football because it's a very competitive market where you have a lot of incentives to search for the talent and where the talent is than in public bureaucracies. But we have to try to do it like in football and those competitive markets. And that's the problem with public bureaucracies, because we are not used to try to be competitive. So it's interesting to try to assess which country is doing better, because it's inevitable that in every system we will have trade-offs, and we have to decide which is the balance that we prefer. We have to try to strike the more efficient and fair balance between different things, because maybe we have quickness and a rapid process for selecting people, but that may have a cost in fairness. It's not the same to test knowledge than skills, as I was said. Or for instance, with the stat exam in Germany, maybe that's very efficient allocation resources, but maybe the vocation of service suffer a bit because you are allocating people only after this rank that you made. And the last trade-off, and very clear trade-off, is the trade-off, the French trade-off between the ENA, the École Nationale d'Administration, and social inclusion. It's not the same if you look for excellence than if you look for social inclusion. You have to balance both. Some examples of innovative recruitment across Europe. I have already explained some of them, but it's clear that mirroring private market selection processes, like for instance, is doing the European Union bureaucracy, is a very interesting thing. We have to use more skill test, aptitude testing than knowledge. That's more quick also, that's quicker also, so it's maybe better. The German example is a very good one because it's really efficient allocating resources, human resources, because of their capacity. And the French system of the ENA, as I was saying, is really interesting, but it's really interesting only if you do a proper scouting of this, of the people, notwithstanding their situation. And that's why leveling the playing field is so important. And there are some UK social inclusion programs which are really interesting, and some gender programs in the Scandinavian countries that are also really, really interesting. That was more or less what I wanted to explain to you as an introduction, because it's Alba Soriano who is going to develop a bit further, which are the best strategies that we consider after quick research on different innovative procedures in different countries in Europe, which is going to be the best system. But a final idea. In doing so, we want to attract the best possible candidates, but also we want to create an environment where it's possible to retain them. So we always think that public bureaucracies have a problem in order to do so. But we have also to point out that we have some strengths. There are some perks associated with the job in the public sector, as perks associated with this civil service that we can make bigger if we have a creative bureaucracy. Because tenure and job security are interesting, but the sense of fulfillment, some emotional rewards are going to be higher if we do things in a proper way. And we have the possibility to do that, to have that in a bigger extent than in the private sector. And also innovative environments that allows more personal freedom while doing your job, etc., are going to be better in order to do that. So it's important to do this reflection, to try to do things better in our public systems, because that will allow us not only to attract best people, but also to retain them. And with that, I leave the floor to Alba Soriano, which is going to explain a bunch of concrete proposals to experiment with after the research that we have made. Many thanks, and if you have some questions, I will take them after the presentations.
Thank you so much, Andrés. This was very inspiring briefing. Alba, I think you were very well introduced by your colleague, Andrés.
Thank you, Ramon and Andrés, and thank you to the whole organization of the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. So I'm going to focus on two objectives that have been key in the development of our proposals towards the improvement of public employment selection and recruitment processes. These objectives are, on the one hand, increasing in general the efficiency of the public sector and in improving selection processes, and on the other hand, reducing inequality in the access to public employment. I'm going to focus mainly on the case of Spain because it's the case study we developed, but please bear in mind that we consider these proposals to be more or less applicable to other public administration, public sector systems. So in order to improve the efficiency of the public sector in general, and specifically of public employment recruitment systems, we consider that it is necessary to reduce the proportion of civil service positions to a minimum, and to modify civil service selection processes in order to select the best candidates possible. When I refer to civil service, civil servants, I do so as a subcategory within public employment. Most countries differentiate between two main categories of public employees, civil servants and public servants. In Spain and in many other countries, more or less, civil servants are those that develop inherently public tasks. So tasks that require the exercise of public authority, or for the development of which it is necessary, it is essential to be especially impartial, especially independent and objective. And public servants develop other types of tasks that are also necessary for the normal development of the work of public administrations, but that are more closely or are more assimilated to private sector tasks. So the specially sensitive nature of the types of tasks that are developed by civil servants require establishing a series of measures and mechanisms that ensure that these public employees are selected in the most objective manner possible and that they can develop their job with as much independence and impartiality as possible. For example, in the case of Spain, civil service selection processes are very lengthy and costly. They consist of a series of very theoretical standardized exams to ensure that the candidates are selected very objectively and to avoid nepotism and other kinds of problems that result from more flexible selection processes. However, the types of recruitment processes that we use here in Spain do not ensure selecting the best candidates. In addition, civil servants are also enjoy a series of benefits in order to develop their job with as much impartiality as possible. They have tenured positions, which means that it is very difficult to remove them from their job, even if they're not developing it correctly. Conversely, public servants can be selected using more flexible selection processes, and they can be removed more easily if they do not develop their work correctly. So one of the key problems we have detected in Spain is that the civil servant category has been applied far beyond those public employment positions that make it necessary. We consider that only those positions that require developing inherently public tasks should be categorized as civil servant positions. Applying this category to other public employment positions that do not actually require it creates static systems, static public bodies with largely ineffective organizational systems that cannot adapt to the changing social reality that they are supposed to be responding to. So our first proposal, inspired by some comparative examples, such as the Italian one, is that civil service positions should be reduced to only those that are strictly necessary. Increasing the proportion of public servants will enable public bodies to adapt selection processes to the requirements of specific positions and create more dynamic and adaptable organizations. In addition, we also consider that the civil service selection processes should be modified while ensuring that they are carried out in the most objective manner, and they also ensure the theoretical knowledge of applicants of those selected. We therefore base our proposal on the German model that Andrés already explained briefly. The first phase of this system would consist of a state exam that is aimed towards candidates that have finished their university degree in the previous year. Once they pass this exam, they would move on to a paid internship period, and then they would have to pass a second state exam, after which they would select the position they want to occupy amongst those that they are offered in the civil service. This proposal is also closely related to the second objective, which is reducing inequality in the access to public employment. By introducing a paid internship system, we avoid some of the problems that we have in Spain, especially in the access to top-tier civil service positions. which have proven, given our current system, to privilege those that have the economic resources to spend a few years full-time studying after they finish their degree in order to access the civil service. For example, on average, judges in Spain have spent 4 to 5 years studying full-time before they pass all the exams that are necessary in order to become a judge. This reality does not only create inequalities, but also very significant social and personal inefficiencies, as young people spend their most productive years studying in order to become civil servants. In addition, in order to enhance equality in the access to public employment, we also put forward a proposal based on the UK internship system that would be specifically aimed to members of racial and ethnic minorities, to individuals that come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and other disadvantaged groups. These paid internship systems would be addressed both to people with a university degree and without a university degree. And they would be aimed not only to offer, especially those more vulnerable individuals, work experience, but also to train many of them in order to become part of the public sector. We have also put forward a series of proposals specifically focused on ensuring and enhancing gender equality and aim to improve the selection of public managers. However, since I think I'm out of time, we can maybe discuss them later on during the discussion. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions later on.
Thank you very much, Alba. I think those issues of efficiency, but at the same time quality, are actually issues that can apply in every policy that the public sector is carrying. So, like, also it's something that we've been discussing this week. Well, you were explaining, there is also another element that we see very important. No? There was the thing of mirroring the reality that you are acting to, no? Mirror the country that you are serving, or mirror the city you are serving, no? So I think that image Andrés that you were using from the French football team, it's very, very accurate, no? Because it shows a better image of what France actually is probably than public sector. It's not only about leveraging the potential of diversity, but actually reflecting the reality that is there. Now I'd like to give the floor to Nikki Linsell to explain the case of public practice, which is, as I said, a non-for-profit organization that places urban planning professionals within public sector organizations. And then after her explanation, because it is a case that I'm really impressed of the job that they are doing, I like actually if Andrés and Alba can reflect on that specific case and on the learnings of their practice related to the research that you've been doing. Nikki, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ramon, and thanks for having me. It's been a really fascinating few days. I'm going to take everyone a quick whistle-stop tour of public practice, and I hopefully won't repeat everything that you might have seen before, but we are a not-for-profit, as Ramon's already said, but our kind of core sort of purpose is to increase and diversify specifically built environment expertise working in local government. So we're not talking about central civic government, but we're talking about local councils. And what we offer, so our kind of what we do day to day as a team is we run a quite specific, very unique professional placement program for people with built environment expertise, and they have to have at least 3 years of work experience before applying to our program, and they come and we place them in local government. Why did we set this up? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Planning in general, the discipline of planning and planning officers is known as one of the hardest things for our government to recruit for compared to other professions. And specifically, we were founded by the Mayor of London, and in London boroughs, recruiting for these types of skills and expertise is incredibly difficult. The other sort of third pillar to what we do, and even our own Secretary of State back in March 2018 did a whole event on inclusive recruitment, is that it's so important, as we've already been saying, about recruiting and having people serve the nation that reflects the nation. And that's something that we try and do through our recruitment process, which I'll quickly go on. I think COVID's highlighted that there's a real appetite for people to work for the public good and work for their public. One evidence is within 2 years of us running, we've had over nearly 1,000 applicants, and over 90 of them were coming from outside the public sector. So I think there's a real appetite for people coming from the private to the public. What do they do on the job? I think this is the really interesting thing that Ramon and Alba have already kind of flagged, which is what do you actually do in the job, and the challenges that you might face, and what kind of people do you need to be a good client and represent your public in that sense. And we've got the climate crisis. We have, particularly in the UK, we've got a housing crisis. And we've also got the death of the high street. And that picks up on so many different challenges, both economic, environmental, social. So our placements, the placements that we look to recruit for, are kind of not a fixed job. They are looking at a really complex, challenging brief. And it's an ongoing one, and it will change, and it's quite agile. And for example, it's supporting town centre recoveries. It's not a specific expert that's an economist or an accountant. They're working with people, they're creating governing structures, they're designing projects, they're being great clients, they're delivering, they're great project managers. They respond to emergencies and pandemics and change our streets within minutes, which is about logistics. It's about mapping, it's having GIS skills, it's about engaging with communities, so designing amazing facilitating workshops. How do you select those people? How do you deliver housing? How do you assess sites? How do you ensure quality? How do you increase sustainable remits within those housing? How do you rethink the assets of the public? How do you look at a brief and change it from one thing to something that becomes a community asset? Also, we've started to recruit for more infrastructure roles, so a much broader, really exciting range of how do you look at the things that are going below ground as well as our social infrastructure, and how do you coordinate that with your colleagues within the public sector. And an ongoing one is digital tools. How do you start using digital and tech to start sort of innovating the way we communicate to the public, but also the way we run and map our own work within the public sector. Another one is we place someone in working with hospitals now, looking at how do you create healthier streets, or how do you shape policy, and how do you engage and design a great brief to engage people to shape their own policy that's then going to impact their own places. And there's obviously the climate emergency, and how do you build a new master plan that has really high sustainability credibbles. Dan worked in Ashford looking at how do you design a really interesting legal structure to create a stewardship program for a place that doesn't yet exist. So all of these challenges, I think from our experience, has been around, yes, we source candidates that have a more hard skill or knowledge background. So they are bringing some form of expertise from a wealth of sort of built environment disciplines. But the way we recruit is very differently. In fact, I think we source candidates by being very specific on our targeted communications. We do lots of outreach. One thing we're very careful on is unbiased language. So we look at the way we reach out and source all our candidates to make sure there's no gender bias in any of our wording. And we constantly collect diversity of our data. Our first round of application is only 4 questions with 250 words maximum each. And that's what everyone is assessed on. They are attribute-based questions. They are not sort of other forms of knowledge testing. We blind review all of them by at least 3 judges. We use tie-break decisions. In the UK, it's illegal to have positive discrimination, but you can have positive action. So whenever there's a candidate of equal merit, we'll bring through one from a more protected discipline. And then all the scores are visible to applicants. We then do a placement workshop, which is a full day assessment. And there are like a number of exercises to this. 90-second presentation, a group exercise, and then a panel interview in the afternoon. And during those days, we're not testing for, have you got an architecture degree? Are you a surveyor? Have you got a professional qualification? We're looking at a different form of attribute. We're looking for people with initiative, with empathy, humility, ability to have perspective on their work, a strong level of resilience, a sensitivity to quality, and a fascination with places. And we're constantly reviewing these, but these are the kind of attributes that we think that kind of all of our associates should bring to their placement. And through that process, we have to try and make it as sort of fair and as transparent as possible. We have a clear scoring criteria throughout. We always make sure we have a mixed interview panel. We have competency-based questions, and like small things, we try and make sure there's no affinity or group bias or any forms of bias when we're scoring, so we don't discuss our results until after we've scored them individually. And the results of that are that we're doing what we can to increase the diversity of our cohorts that are then being placed into local government, with that being both in an ethnicity terms, in gender, but also LGBTQ, disability, and also a neurodiverse range of people, which I think is something that I'd really like to discuss more about, is what is this good person that we're trying to recruit? What does that look like? On top of that, we run a 10% R&D program. So part of their placement, all of our associates attend our program. And it's kind of like a sort of core curriculum foundation to get them to learn about what it is in public planning and learn about the local government. And we've done them virtually now as well as in person. And I'll quickly go on to some reflections. I was thinking yesterday about what are the kind of key things that I think we believe in as an organisation, or try and or have learned. And I think one of them is, there's a thing around inclusive hiring processes that we try to design our recruitment process as inclusive as possible, rather than starting from quite an exclusive starting point of, we don't ask anyone to have a degree. It's about what experience and skills have you got? What would you bring to your placement? And I think that's been quite interesting for us. Another thing is, I think, becoming more apparent with inclusive recruitment and good practice. There's a great organisation in the UK called Applied that is leading the way on inclusive recruitment, and no CVs. You have to look at workplace sample testing, not what degree you've got. And I think this is something that's becoming more apparent for us, is what do people bring today, not what did they do 3 years ago, and what's on paper, what are they now? And I think that's really one of the key things that we're looking to sort of continue to test. More a thing around the jobs that they do. I think something that's becoming evident, particularly over COVID, is the need to have an agile civil service, particularly in local government, where they have been redeployed recently in lots of different jobs. And the job itself will constantly change, and I think it constantly should change to make it an interesting place to work. So the role of a public planner should have agile objectives and not these really core rigid responsibilities. And I think that in turn changes the question of what type of person you're looking to take on that role. And another one was, rather than doing a degree about doing the job, I think what we're learning is all about in practice knowledge. So it's tacit, explicit and implicit knowledge, and how do you really gain that? And I think there's a huge power of learning on the job and learning with people and through the work. So yeah, they were my quick learnings. Quick fire.
Thank you so much, Nikki. It's very, very impressive. I'm wondering already, like, 2 questions. Like one question is, can they stay after the placement? And the second is how this is making the organizations better. Because there is actually one question on the chat already that we are focusing too much on recruiting, which is the main topic of the session, but as well how it's important to see how can we ensure that our present workforce has the skills to be creative. So how those places are making the organizations and the other people in the organizations better.
Well, for your answer to your first question, yes, the majority of our associates have actually stayed on in their sort of roles or within their councils that they were placed in. Often they've ended up applying internally to get a fixed term or permanent position. But we do see it as a kind of people dipping their toe in from the private sector. And it's really great to see that most of them want to stay there. Your second question around how are they making it different? I think there's a thing, particularly for the built environment industry, is about being a good client. And I think the role of, I trained as an architect, but the role of being an architect in local government isn't to be an architect. It's about to commission good architects and to understand the briefs and design the briefs. And I think that's becoming more apparent as in the UK, we're taking on more of the lead of public housing being built and delivered on our own. And I think this pandemic has shown that we need good logistics, and you need to commission the private sector to do things, but you need good people doing those commissions. And I think that's the learnings that people can bring from their work experience in the private sector into the public sector and be able to understand both viewpoints. I think has been a really good, powerful one.
Thanks, Andrés. Alba?
So it was really interesting, Nikki. Congratulations for all the job you are doing. The primary feeling I had while listening to you was envy, because we have not the possibility in Spain to have such a thing, and it's really a pity. And there are two very interesting things that you are focusing on: municipalities, on local councils, and I clearly understand why. But here in Spain, in a tradition like ours, to do so in a local government is even more difficult than to do so in a state bureaucracy or regional bureaucracy, because today, local government in Spain is closely controlled from the top levels of the state bureaucracy, and they analyze and control how they spend every euro, and they have strict limits about recruiting, because we have some limits because the European Union economic guidelines. In other countries, it's different, but here in Spain, the state has considered that in order to follow those guidelines, it was essential to control every recruitment process in local government. So it's kind of a disaster. And what you explain is a wonderful example of the kind of mixture between private process of recruiting, but also with public guideline in mind and public objectives in mind. I think is wonderful. And the other idea I had is that in order to build such a project, it's essential to have a lot of trust, a lot of social trust, because one of the things why I think in countries like Spain or maybe Southern Europe, those systems are regarded as not inefficient, but not fair, is because we do not have the trust on our local bureaucracies or politicians or people or insiders, civil servants and other insiders. We do not trust them that they are going to be objective, that they are going to be not biased, that they are not going to look only for the typical jobs for the boys. And but the thing is that in order to build such a social trust, you need to go step by step. If you do not risk to try to do that kind of things, sometimes you are going always to feel this reluctance to begin with. So it was really nice to hear to you, and I think we have a lot of things to learn from your experience. I can assure you that Alba and myself, we are going to use your example in our next works.
But there is one thing that actually like made me think about, because one of the, like, when you, Nikki, were explaining the work that the different associates are doing in local authorities, this kind of work is highly creative. You know what they're doing, but most of the times public institutions are just subcontracting those kind of works. No, and since we are discussing about the innovation and creativity within public sector, it's sometimes very, I don't know, it's even a bit sad that most public organizations are actually hiring private consultancies to do the work that is more innovative and creative. And Alba, you actually you were pointing out about those not civil servants of this kind of work that obviously has to know more about the context, has to be their skills has to be updated. It has to be more flexible, but at the same time fair. So Alba, I'm wondering if you can give us some tips about how can we ensure that we hire the right people, but keeping the fun side of public work within public sector organizations, because I think we can see that there are a big advantage of doing so.
Yeah, so, well, there are a couple of things. Firstly, thank you very much for your presentation. It's a very interesting example of how to improve efficiency and creative work in the public sector. So many of the skills, of the tasks that I think are required for the types of public jobs that you select people for are what I define more as public servants rather than civil servants, I think. So so one of the things that we propose is specifically introducing more flexible mechanisms. And so for instance, the whole, I think your system is actually quite good, introducing some aptitude tests rather than theoretical knowledge-based tests. And I think personal interviews are also essential. However, the thing is, I'm constantly thinking about how this could be applied or implemented in Spain. And the key problem we have here is lack of trust in the selection of public employees. And I think that's why it's so hard, so difficult to implement these systems. So perhaps we would still have to, in systems like ours, would still have to, at least to a certain extent, use these theoretical based models, at least in part of the process, in order to ensure that people trust the selection process. And another thing that came up to my mind, so is the thing of how private employees, people who work for the private sector, move on to work for the public sector. Here in Spain, the public sector is very attractive in general due to the working conditions. But people that are very good at their jobs don't go on to the public sector because it's so hard to get in, because they have to spend so many years studying and they cannot work from the beginning. They cannot enter and have a job from the beginning. So I'm wondering, in the UK, how's the relationship? How are the interactions in moving from the private to the public sector and vice versa?
I think it's a very different environment in the UK. It's pretty much the opposite. Pay scales and even the workplace, the type of work, the office you'll be in is the private sector is much more attractive. And I think also one thing around the challenge in the UK is that there's private sector, and maybe everywhere, is that the risk and reward relationship of your employees is much more innovative and much more exciting in the private sector, because they're much more willing to take risk and you're much likely to receive the rewards. Whereas in the public sector, that hierarchy, that rigidness that still exists in UK local government means that, Ramon, going to your question around retention and keeping people there and making it exciting, I think that's the real challenge of how do you create a public service that hasn't got a growth potential, but how do you provide your employees with growth opportunities. And I think that's a really difficult challenge. And we do it in the UK too, of outsourcing out to consultants, which is a real, disappointment to everyone that does work in the public sector. They're saying, but I would love to be doing that work. Why aren't I? And I think from what my stories I've heard today is around risk, pushing out risk. It's better to, decommission that risk to a consultant than to take it on as a team. And I think that demands a different type of team structure as well. But I was also going to flag a thing around emotional intelligence, something that we've noticed that actually a public servant is about empathy and understanding and emotional intelligent leadership. It's not about your kind of own career perspectives, and I think that's actually a really key attribute that we've noticed that all of our kind of associates and bring. And how I was wondering how does the Spanish or other equivalent models test for that? What is a good quality? What is that degree? What are you looking for in a civil servant? Because surely isn't it those skill sets that are more important than whether they have hard knowledge?
Well, in the Spanish system, the problem is especially that they don't test for those types of attributes, probably. So yeah, so the thing here is that the actual jobs are quite static, they don't change, but the working conditions are attractive. So people that enter, they're not necessarily bad at their jobs, at least, or but they do get, I think there's a level of stagnation that happens as you spend 40 years doing the same thing that is not very interesting and that doesn't change. And I think that's also kind of the problem, and that's why we aim to solve it through modifying also recruitment processes.
I have, if I may, Ramon, may I? So I have a very quick question to Nikki, because I was really excited about your example and about what you explained, but you have explained to us the bright side. And in order to get through, or if we want to copy you, we need also to know about the problems you have faced. So my question would be, which are the main problems you have faced, and also which have been the reception of people in the cities where you have displayed this project? Because it's interesting to know whether there have been criticism or have you tested which was the reaction, the reception?
Yeah, I think just off the top of my head, really quickly, I would say there's definitely lots of challenges. One of them that we're very aware of is that there's many people already working in local government that have spent many years building up their knowledge and working their way through the system. And the idea now of suggesting that people can join at different grades without having that initial local government and specifically public planning knowledge can create tension. And I think that's something that we're aware of, and there's a dialogue around what does that mean about again, that goes to empathy of understanding that you're no longer the expert in your workplace and you're there to learn from your peers, and that's that peer-to-peer learning, which I think is really, really essential. The other thing that's definitely a big challenge is similar to the Spanish model, that the hierarchical HR structures of government, where fixed posts, it takes a long time to generate a new post. There has to be a graded system. You can't move up until someone else is gone, which creates a huge amount of transfer across councils. How do you change that? Performance reviews, the fact there's this I'm convinced, I'm sure there's the Peter principle riddled all over local government. And how do you, change it from a job for life to you have to constantly be showing that you're adding value. And I think that has to be a two-way conversation between the local government employer and also you as an employee. And it has to be a more trust-based relationship, which I don't think exists when you're in the job. So I think there's a lot to learn from startups, agile environments, rebel ways of working, flatter or flatarchies, or different ways of reviewing how organizations are structured within local government. And I think that might start to answer some of Ramon's questions about how do you make it and keep it exciting and have all the exciting work there. But yeah, there's definitely the similar problems in the UK.
And the general reaction of and reception of citizens. Do you know it has been good or?
Yeah, I guess some of our associates and the work we do is around engaging a lot of community stakeholders and trying to rethink the way things are done. We're still a very young organisation, so we haven't done a longitudinal impact study of some of the place-based work that we've done. But yeah, the more of the feedback we get is around the clients. So a developer or something would say it's been great to have someone the other side of the table understanding our language when it talks about development or land assemblies or community engagement. So I think just that kind of understanding of each other, because you've been there, has helped generate good relationships.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid that we have to start to wrap up, but I hope like this connection works as well. Andrés, Alba, please invite Nikki to Spain. So let's try to copy that model, and also let's hope to copy that model to other Southern European countries that are facing the same issue. And also really recommend you to check the highlight hour and the great work that Margie Cost is doing with the global survey on creativity in bureaucracy, because the results are really amazing. No? How, for instance, COVID is changing the perception on the long work of civil servants, because there is a higher proud of their work, because it seems that in this particular situation, for the first time in a lot of time, people is actually recognizing the value of public sector work. So that's very, very interesting. But it's also very interesting that people perceive themselves as highly creative. No? So there is strong potential. And there are other things that we could be keeping discussing about risk aversion, about like how we innovate within public sector. But I think we get a lot of very, very, very interesting insights. So thank you very much, Alba, Andrés, Nikki. I hope we keep in touch, and enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.